Welcome to MTG Burgeoning, your channel for all things magic. In this video, we are going to discuss the quintessential cards needed to build the core of a Spell-Slinger commander deck with Ovika Enigma Goliath as its general. Ovika Enigma Goliath debuted in Phyrexia All Will Be One and is a 6/6 Phyrexian Nightmare with flying and Ward 3, pay 3 life. The ward cost here makes each opponent pay 3 mana and 3 life whenever they target Ovika with a spell or an ability they control. Ovika's mana value is intensive at 5 Izzet colors. That's a pricey general waiting to be summoned from the command zone, but we'll address that later in the video. Whenever we cast a non-creature spell, Ovika creates X 1/1 red Phyrexian Goblin creature tokens, where X is the mana value of that spell. These Phyrexian Goblins gain haste until end of turn. Our formula here is pretty straightforward. We are going to craft a classic Izzet spell-slinging deck where we take advantage of casting spells through peripheral effects on our side of the battlefield. As we create value on top of value through this spell-slinging engine, we will out-resource and out-tempo our opponents on the path to imminent victory. We begin the core of this build with cards that provide similar effects to Ovika's token-producing triggered ability. Whenever we cast an instant or sorcery spell, Young Pyromancer creates a 1/1 red elemental, Talrand Sky Summoner creates a 2/2 blue drake with flying, and Murmuring Mystic creates a 1/1 blue bird with flying. Metallurgic Summonings creates XX colorless constructs, where X is equal to the mana value of the instant or sorcery spell that triggered it. This enchantment also has a built-in instant and sorcery card recursion ability that costs 3 and 2 blue, which we can only activate if we control at least 6 artifacts. Taking it up a notch from instant and sorcery spells to non-creature spells, Third Path Iconoclast creates 1/1 colorless soldier artifact creature tokens. Saheeli's Sublime Artificer follows suit by creating 1/1 colorless servos. Both Manaform Hellkite and Shark Typhoon create XX creature tokens, where X is equal to the mana value of the non-creature spell. The Hellkite creates red dragon illusions with flying and haste that are exiled at the beginning of the next end step, while the Typhoon creates blue sharks with flying. Shark Typhoon also can be cycled away for X 1 and a blue mana to draw a card and create an XX blue shark with flying. Since we've demonstrated a propensity for creating creature tokens through our spell slinging, let's exploit this benefit to our advantage even further. Whenever a creature enters the battlefield under our control, Impact Tremors deals 1 point of damage to each opponent. Witty Roastmaster follows suit for other creatures we control, while Perforos, God of the Forge, deals 2 points of damage to each opponent instead of 1. Casting instant, sorcery, and non-creature spells to create creature tokens that can deal direct damage to our opponents is a powerful way to whittle away our opponent's life totals. Now, let's use these same spells to continue this damage-dealing trend. Each time we cast an instant or sorcery spell, Electrostatic Field and Exalted Flamer of Tzeentch deal 1 damage to each opponent, while Gutter Snipe deals 2. The Flamer also returns an instant or sorcery card at random from our graveyard to our hand at the beginning of our upkeep, ensuring that our spell-slinging ways will never end. Niv Mizzet Perrin deals 1 point of damage to any target whenever we draw a card, and it has a built-in card draw ability that triggers whenever any player casts an instant or sorcery spell. This dynamic can get out of hand very quickly. If we can convince ourselves that allowing each opponent to gain 10 life is manageable, then including a copy of Aria of Flame is a no-brainer. When this enchantment comes into play, each opponent gains 10 life. Whenever we cast an instant or sorcery spell, we put a verse counter on Aria of Flame, and then it deals damage equal to the number of verse counters on it to target player or planeswalker. With the number of spells we plan to sling in this build, we'll erase each opponent's gifted life, and a whole lot more. Both Firebrand Archer and Kessig Flame Breather are triggered by any non-creature spells we cast by dealing 1 point of damage to each opponent. Lamb Holt Raconteur and its backside, Lamb Holt Ravager, both follow suit, respectively dealing 1 or 2 points of damage to each opponent. Creating creature tokens and dealing direct damage are not the only benefits of our spell slinging. Let's reward ourselves with resources that will propel us even further ahead of our opponents. Whenever we cast or copy an instant or sorcery spell, Stormkiln Artist creates a treasure token, while Archmage Emeritus draws us a card. Varen, Voice of Duality, follows suit and gets +1/+1 until end of turn for doing so. Whenever casting or copying an instant or sorcery spell causes a triggered ability of a permanent we control to trigger, that ability triggers an additional time. Each of the cards already showcased in this video apply here. As a great way to copy our instant and sorcery spells, we include Thousand Year Storm. Whenever we cast one of these spells, we copy it for each other spell cast before it this turn. We may choose new targets for the copy. This enchantment should draw the ire of each opponent at the EDH table. There are even more spell-slinging payoffs for us to mention. Earlier, we discussed various ways to create oodles of creature tokens. Well, Candlekeep Inspiration can be a great finisher while sitting behind a formidable token army. Until end of turn, creatures we control have base power and toughness of XX, where X is the number of cards we own in exile and in our graveyard that are instant cards, sorcery cards, and or cards that have adventure. In this build, we should have a graveyard teeming with instant and sorcery cards. As such, we can consider this sorcery a win condition. Speaking of win conditions, Surge to Victory fits that mold perfectly here. Upon exiling target instant or sorcery card from our graveyard, our aforementioned army of creatures get +X/+0 until end of turn, where X is that card's mana value. As a powerful bonus, whenever a creature we control deals combat damage to a player this turn, we copy the exile card and we may cast the copy without paying its mana cost. Notice the text here. It says whenever a creature. This is not a whenever one or more creatures line of text. For each creature that deals combat damage to a player this way, we copy the exile card and cast the copy for free. As we will see later in this video when we begin showcasing our suite of instant and sorcery spells, if we successfully cast Surge to Victory, then the game should end soon after. As spell-slinging synergies go, Sorcerer class fits the core of this build beautifully. When it comes into play, we draw 2 cards and then discard 2 cards. If we pay a blue and a red, then we move to level 2. Here, creatures we control can tap to add a blue or a red mana. We can only use this mana to cast instant or sorcery spells or to gain a class level. This is another way we can benefit from our army of creature tokens. If we pay 3 a blue and a red, then we move to level 3. Here, whenever we cast an instant or sorcery spell, that spell deals damage to each opponent equal to the number of instant and sorcery spells we've cast this turn. As each level of this class is relevant to a spell-slinging theme, we can consider this enchantment to be one of the build's most versatile and important inclusions. For a little more synergy for our cause, Veilstone Amulet protects our creatures with hexproof whenever we cast a spell, which can be a powerful layer of security for the purposes of keeping our spell-slinging creatures and general safe from harm. Even when our instant and sorcery spells are in our graveyard, Lear, Disciple of the Drowned, gives them another go-around by giving them flashback. The flashback cost is equal to the spell's mana cost. As a bonus around which we can scheme, spells cannot be countered. As we alluded to earlier in this video, Ovika has a mana value of 7. Let's provide some relief from this high CMC by including some ways to reduce its casting cost. Both Ruby Medallion and Sapphire Medallion make our red and blue spells cost 1 less to cast, respectively. With both of these artifacts on our side of the battlefield, Ovika's casting cost is down to 3, a blue and a red. In addition to reducing the mana costs of our spells, we can also cast spells for the purposes of accelerating our mana. We showcased a slew of ways to produce creature tokens earlier in this video. Let's take advantage of this feature by including a copy of Battle Hymn. This instant gives us a red mana for each creature we control. Seething Song gives us 5 red mana for a casting cost of 2 and a red. Mana Geyser gives us a red mana for each tapped land our opponents control. Jeska's Will gives us the option to add a red mana for each card in target opponent's hand, or to exile the top 3 cards of our library. We may play them this turn. If Ovika is on our side of the battlefield as we cast this spell, we may choose both options. Rousing Refrain gives us a red mana for each card in target opponent's hand, and until end of turn, we don't lose this mana as steps and phases end. Then we exile Rousing Refrain with 3 time counters on it. We can choose to pay the suspend cost for this card. If we do, then it's exiled with 3 time counters on it instead. Rousing Refrain loops every 3rd turn after we cast it or suspend it. This repeatable source of free mana continues undeterred unless an opponent uses counter magic to stop it, a process by which we benefit from greatly. We always want Rousing Refrain in our opening hand in order to gain as much value from it as possible. It is one of the most powerful cards in this build. Our mana acceleration trend continues with Unexpected Windfall and Big Score. Each is an instant with a mana value of 4 and an additional cost of discarding a card. When we do, we draw 2 cards and create 2 treasure tokens. For a larger trove of treasure tokens, we can cast Brass's Bounty and create a number of treasure tokens equal to the number of lands we control. These spells are dependable sources of mana acceleration for the purposes of getting Ovika onto the battlefield way ahead of curve. Speaking of casting spells way ahead of curve, let's include a suite of cards that lower the casting costs of our instant and sorcery spells. Goblin Electromancer and Baral, Chief of Compliance, reduce these costs by 1 and each have a mana value of 2. Haughty Djinn does the same for 1 more mana, but also has flying, and its power is equal to the number of instant and sorcery cards in our graveyard, while Baral also has a counter magic looting ability. Both Rowan, Scholar of Sparks, and Will, Scholar of Frost, also reduce our instant and sorcery spells by 1, in addition to possessing an array of different loyalty abilities ranging from direct damage and spell copying to creature disruption, card draw, and a mass exiling effect. Primal Amulet continues this mana reduction trend. Whenever we cast an instant or sorcery spell, we put a charge counter on this artifact. Then, if there are 4 or more charge counters on it, we may remove those counters and transform Primal Amulet into Primal Wellspring, a land that taps to add 1 mana of any color. If this mana is spent to cast an instant or sorcery spell, then we copy that spell and may choose new targets for the copy. Notice the text of Primal Amulet. Its transformation ability is a may ability. We are not forced to transform it into Primal Wellspring, but we probably should. Let's take it up a notch when it comes to reducing the casting costs of our instant and sorcery spells. Wizards of Thay reduces these spells by 1. This human wizard also has Myriad, so whenever it attacks, for each opponent other than defending player, we may create a token that's a copy of this creature that's tapped and attacking that player or a planeswalker they control. These tokens are exiled at the end of combat. In this scenario, our instant and sorcery spells are reduced by more than 1 for a brief time during combat. It's a good thing Wizards of Thay lets us cast sorcery spells as though they had flash. Speaking of flash, Mind Splice Apparatus has it and reduces the cost of our instant and sorcery spells by 1 for each oil counter on it. At the beginning of our upkeep, we put an oil counter on this artifact. The earlier we get this card onto the battlefield, the lesser our instant and sorcery spells will cost. Vadrik Astral Archmage reduces these spells by X, where X is his power. When Vadrik comes into play, if it's neither day nor night, it becomes day. And whenever day becomes night or night becomes day, we put a +1/+1 counter on Vadrik. As a quick refresher, at the beginning of each player's untap step, if it's day and the previous player in turn order did not cast any spells during their turn, then it becomes night. If it's night, and the previous player in turn order cast at least 2 spells during their turn, then it becomes day. There is the potential for Vadrik's power to grow throughout the game, thereby reducing the cost of our instant and sorcery spells even further. Whenever we cast an instant or sorcery spell, if its mana value is greater than the number of experience counters we have, Mizzix of the Magnus gives us an experience counter. Our instant and sorcery spells cost 1 less to cast for each experience counter we have. Magnus the Red's casting cost reduction is dependent on the number of creature tokens we control. Each creature token reduces the casting cost of our instant and sorcery spells by 1. This is just another versatile use of our creature tokens. What if we don't have any creature tokens? No worries. Magnus creates a 3/3 red spawn creature token whenever it deals combat damage to a player. As a 4/5 with flying, we should be able to connect for some combat damage with this Demon Primarch. Now let's bring this video to a close by discussing some powerful cards that fit the theme and scope of this build beautifully. We begin with getting cards into our hand. Seagate Restoration draws us cards equal to the number of cards in our hand +1, and we have no maximum hand size for the rest of the game. Finale of Revelation draws us X cards, and if X is 10 or more, then we shuffle our graveyard into our library, draw X cards, untap up to 5 lands, and have no maximum hand size for the rest of the game, and we exile Finale of Revelation. With Arcane Endeavor, we roll 2 d8s and choose 1 result. We draw cards equal to that result, and then we may cast an instant or sorcery spell from our hand with mana value equal to or less than the other result without paying its mana cost. Get those lucky d8s ready to roll. Let's use the top of our library as a spell-slinging resource as well. If we cast Apex of Power from our hand, then we add 10 mana of any one color and exile the top 7 cards of our library. Until end of turn, we may cast spells from among these exiled cards. Epic Experiment exiles the top X cards of our library, and we may cast any number of instant and sorcery spells with mana value X or less from among them without paying their mana costs. Aminatu's Augury exiles the top 8 cards of our library. We may put a land card from among these cards into play, and until end of turn, for each non-land card type from among these exiled cards, we may cast a spell of that type without paying its mana cost. We've got cards in our hand, we've got cards on top of our library, now let's use the cards in graveyards. Mnemonic Deluge exiles target instant or sorcery card from a graveyard. We copy that card 3 times and may cast the copies without paying their mana costs. If we overload Mizzix's Mastery, then we exile each instant and sorcery card in our graveyard. For each card exiled this way, we copy it, and we may cast the copy without paying its mana cost. Lastly, for a couple of game enders, Crackle with Power deals 5 times X damage to each of up to X targets, while Time Stretch allows us to take 2 extra turns after this one. We should have little trouble closing out a game thereafter. This video provided a blueprint for building the core of a Spell-Slinger commander deck around Ovika, Enigma Goliath as its general. Removal spells, disruption, ramp, and the land base can vary from build to build, and also are dependent on metagame preferences and availability. The cards discussed during this video are suggested options for crafting the core of a Spell-Slinger EDH deck, in addition to providing ways to optimize this theme. Let me know your thoughts about these recommendations in the comment section below. This is MTG Burgeoning, your channel for all things magic.